Hey everyone, welcome back to DTVC Extra. As always, this is Matt, and this episode we're going to start our look at Nicolas Cage 90s action movies. So in this episode, we'll be looking at The Rock and Con Air. Next episode, we'll be looking at Face Off and Snake Eyes. And I say next episode just because Captain America Brave New World is going to be coming out on Disney Plus soon, and I don't know if I'll do like a one-off in between, or if I'll just get to the Nicolas Cage movies, finish those off, and then do a one-off on Brave New World. I may not do a one-off on it at all. Who knows? But so tentatively planned for right now, this episode on these two Nicolas Cage movies, and then the next episode will be the final two of those movies. Now, in terms of why I picked these four movies, I saw that they were all on streaming, and I think originally it was Con Air and The Rock were on Hulu, which makes sense because I think they were Buena Vista films, so Disney owned them, so they would put them on Hulu. And then the other two were on Paramount Plus, Snake Eyes and Face Off. And then subsequently, The Rock was moved to MGM Plus, and I just happened to have a free week of that on my cable company, so I was able to get that in. I also have the Criterion version of it, so I could just pop it in the DVD player, but it's a little bit harder because the DVD player's out in the living room, and so my wife would have to want to watch it with me. And I don't know how keen she would be on watching the Criterion version of The Rock, especially if I watched it with the Michael Bay commentary, which I did a long time ago when I first bought that. We'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. But yeah, so the other two were on Paramount Plus. I think one of the two, either Snake Eyes or Face Off, have since moved to Pluto. But anyway, they're all available. And looking at the four that I picked, you could potentially look at that and say, well, why are you not adding 8mm if you're adding Snake Eyes? Well, the reason why is that I didn't realize until I looked into Snake Eyes a little bit more, because I haven't seen it yet. Just full disclosure on that. I also don't think I've seen Face Off. If I've seen it, I don't remember. So it's essentially going to be, it may be one of those deals where I think it's a first-time watch, but then as I watch it, I realize I have seen it before, but it's just been like 30 years. So it'll be kind of like a real first-time watch, but we'll see. But as I looked into Snake Eyes more, I realized that it's more of a Brian De Palma thriller than it is an action movie. But at the time, it was packaged as an action movie, if you think about it, right? Because it came out on the heels of these other three that we'll be talking about. So Hollywood packaged it as another Nicolas Cage-led actioner because the other three had done so well. That's why I thought that. Then as I looked into more, I was like, actually, it's more of a thriller. I don't think it's as much of a thriller, say, as 8mm. That's why I didn't include 8mm. But anyway, I just thought these four movies were interesting for Nicolas Cage's career. And the fact that they were all on streaming, it would be kind of fun to either revisit them in the case of The Rock and Con Air, or to finally watch them in the case of Face Off and Snake Eyes. So that's what we're going to do here. I thought this could be a bit of a fun exercise. Now, before we get in on The Rock, I think it's important, as we always do, to sort of set the stage for where we're at here in the movie industry at this time. And with Nicolas Cage, I think he's a fascinating case because we talked about before in previous episodes, he's a bit of a Nepo baby. He's Francis Ford Coppola's nephew, Talia Shire's nephew as well. And he breaks into the business. He does, he starts off with the name Nicolas Coppola. He then goes to Nicolas Cage. But he does do some Francis Ford Coppola movies like The Cotton Club, Outsiders, Rumblefish. But then he kind of starts to make a name for himself, right, on his own. Peggy Sue Got Married. He's really great in that one. Obviously, Moonstruck, right, is a huge one. Even though Cher wins the Oscar for that movie, I wouldn't say he stole the show, but he was definitely a revelation for people. He was fantastic there, and his career just kind of builds on that. Red Rock West, Raising Arizona. Then he starts doing quirky comedies. He's was it Honeymoon in Vegas? I guess is what it was. The one where he, I don't know if it was a quirky comedy, but it's kind of a feel good comedy or feel good movie. The one where he's, I think it could have been You. I think is what it's called. I should probably have all the movies listed here, but where he gives he tells Bridget Fonda that it could happen to you. That's what it was. He tells Bridget Fonda that he'll split a lottery ticket with her, and then Rosie Perez sues her. A lot of good stuff going on there, right? With that movie, that the Latin American wife is money grubbing and suing, and he gets to marry the nice good white woman there. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff going on with it. It could happen to you. Actually, if you read the actual story about what happened in real life, with that situation, the police officer who offered the tip to the waitress or the server, his wife was completely fine with him splitting it, and everybody lived happily ever after. It was perfectly fine, but you needed some drama, I guess, when you make the movie. But yeah, you think of something like A Guarding Test. He had those movies out that were he'd shown himself to be a quirky fun leading man. He could do serious movies as well, like Kiss of Death, right? You think of that one. James Caruso was, or David Caruso, not James Caruso. David Caruso, he'd been bumped from NYPD Blue for wanting too much money. He does Kiss of Death, and that was supposed to be his break into the movies, but actually Nicolas Cage overshadows him. Everybody really likes Nicolas Cage more. And then, of course, right, he wins the Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas, and that is, I've got that as a top 10 movie for me for the 90s. I absolutely love that performance. And, I think out of that age cohort of those actors that were born in the early to mid 60s, he's the first one to win an Oscar. I was trying to think who else has won Oscars out of that crew. I mean, obviously recently Robert Downey Jr. did for Oppenheimer, but they really, Tom Cruise has never won an Oscar. I know he's been nominated. He should have won the Oscar for Tropic Thunder for Best Supporting Actor. I still believe that. I think the problem was Heath Ledger, right? He won, I think, that year for The Dark Knight. He should have won the year before for Brokeback Mountain. That was his best role. That should have been. I guess they decided they couldn't. At that time, it was still a little bit much for them to give a Best Leading Actor for a person who's playing a gay man. They were okay with it with Milk later on. They realized kind of how they shouldn't have had an issue with that to begin with. But anyway, going off track here. But he's showing himself to be this like really big star, Nicolas Cage. But there was a sense of could this guy actually do action movies? Which is interesting that there was even that question when we talked about in the Die Hard movies, how, the same question was there for Bruce Willis, and, how people laughed when they saw the Die Hard trailer. And it turned out, no, he can do action movies. And throughout this time, a lot of other actors, I mean, obviously Tom Cruise had been doing action movies, right? I mean, Top Gun, I think you can call an action movie, Days of Thunder. So he was proving himself to do action films. And there was a sense, I think, that if Nicolas Cage was going to be whoever was going to slot in after Tom Cruise as sort of this next wave of leading men, right? That we had the guys who were born in the 40s, like De Niro, Nicholson. I think Nicholson, I can't remember if he was born in the 40s or like the late 30s, but you know what I mean. Pacino, those guys who were getting older, but they could still be a leading man in a movie. So you had that crew. Then you had sort of like the later, like the late 40s into the 50s cohorts, like Richard Gere. We talked about Bruce Willis, who's born in the mid 50s. Those guys were also still like Tom Hanks, right? Tom Hanks is a big one at that time. He's winning Oscars as well. But then what about these guys who were born in the early 60s, that Brat Pack crew, who I guess none of them, other than maybe like Emilio Estevez, were really tapped for that kind of stardom, I don't think. But, you've got Tom Cruise, who's kind of already, set himself apart as that kind of guy. The thing about Tom Cruise, though, right, is that he is only picking movies that are going to enhance his career. He's not doing A Honeymoon in Vegas. He's not doing an It Could Happen to You. I mean, the closest thing to a sappy rom-com for him is Jerry Maguire, but even that's directed by Cameron Crowe, right? He's kind of a big name in the industry. So it's like even that movie, and of course that movie didn't yield an Oscar for Tom Cruise, but it did yield one for Cuba Gooding Jr. So even that's kind of a bigger deal. Again, it's not a Honeymoon in Vegas kind of movie. Or even, thinking about like some of the Sleepless in Seattles and things like that like Tom Hanks was doing. Tom Cruise really wasn't doing that kind of thing. But you need someone to do those movies, right? You need someone to fill those spots. And so Nicolas Cage had shown he could do at least those movies, but to be the kind of full-on action lead, he needed to prove his chops with action films as well. Think of some of the other names at that time. Obviously, we mentioned Tom Cruise. I mean, you've got Johnny Depp, who's around that same age cohort. You've got Robert Downey Jr., who's in that age cohort. We know Robert Downey Jr. kind of falls off due to, the drug issues that he had. And then, of course, he ends up having this resurgence with the Marvel movies that kind of makes him bigger than any of them. And then, Johnny Depp kind of always sort of floated. I think he was always sort of in the same realm as Nicolas Cage, and then he gets those Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I think those ones really, really help him. But it's interesting looking at his career at that time because he's doing more quirkier films as well with people like John Waters and with Tim Burton. So it was interesting. Hollywood was looking for somebody that could be underneath Tom Cruise that could fill this niche that some of these bigger names were starting to fall out of because they were either aging out of it, or they just weren't wanting those kinds of roles. And so there's a question of, could Nicolas Cage be that person? So he gets his shot with The Rock, right? That's his first action movie. And again, there was a sense that he couldn't do action. There was a sense that he wouldn't be believable in an action role. And what I think is great about The Rock is that they pair him with Sean Connery, which allows him to really kind of be himself, Nicolas Cage, and lean on Sean Connery. And I think it's kind of the perfect foray to get him into the action world. Now, granted, I mean, when I think of like what his action stuff is in the 2000s, I don't know that anything really touches The Rock, but it's an interesting one. I mean, I think it's like it was the perfect first action movie for Nicolas Cage. So I think it's a good place for us to start as well, as we kind of talk about this, this actor who had just come off of his Oscar-winning performance in a film that I absolutely loved, and it kind of maybe thinking about myself as a film watcher at that time. I think we talked about it a little bit on the Die Hard episode, that I had fallen out with big action at that time. I really wasn't a fan, didn't really care. Not just big action, but like big budget productions. I just, they didn't really do anything for me. So, seeing the name Jerry Bruckheimer as a producer for a film was usually an automatic turnoff for me. I wasn't going to watch it at that time. I was too good for that kind of thing. Now, of course, I loved action movies, but I was doing, direct-to-video, PM Entertainment, Canon, that kind of stuff. That's what I was going to the video store and watching my action, or turning on cable for it. When I was going to the theater, I mean, yes, I was seeing some major release films. A lot of times they were comedies, horror films, and then I was going to the indie theater, seeing movies at the indie theater. So like something like a Clerks, or Spanking the Monkey or something like that. Which I just realized that Spanking the Monkey, I didn't know that was directed by David O. Russell, the guy who did like The Fighter, who's going to be doing that John Madden movie that Nicolas Cage is going to be in. Kind of this big deal guy who's like always doing movies that get nominated for Oscars, but I've also heard he's like a real jerk to actors on set. But I had no idea. I'm going to see that movie in the the indie theater. That guy is going to end up being like one of these big name directors someday. But you never know with that kind of thing. But anyway, so The Rock was definitely one of those ones where I was like, yeah, I'm not all that interested. And I ended up seeing it on, I think, on TNT or something like that. My friends quoted it a lot. I had a friend who always quoted the Nicolas Cage lines and that, like, let's cut the chit chat a-hole, and Zeus's butthole and all that kind of stuff. I take pleasure in gutting you, boy, all that kind of stuff. And of course, that being a TNT New Classic kind of movie, those TNT New Classics, those were things that when I was in college or, even in high school when you're getting ready to go out and do stuff. Yes, definitely more college where, you'd be in the dorm on a Saturday afternoon, getting ready to go out and do something, and sitting around, you're not going to do anything until that later that night, and maybe people are over hanging out because maybe they were drinking with you, on Friday night, and they ended up crashing at your dorm, and then they're slowly waking up, and there's Con Air's on or The Rock or something like that, and you tune in The Rock, and it's like kind of the middle, right? It's maybe like the sequence where they're all invading the Alcatraz, right? Or the good guys are trying to infiltrate it or whatever. Or maybe it's towards the end, right, where Nicolas Cage gets caught, and the guy's like, oh, I'll take pleasure in gutting you, boy, that kind of stuff. And you knew the whole thing, right? You knew the movie back and forth, so you could pop in at any time and see it. And that's sort of how I kind of ended up being with The Rock. But I never really appreciated it still. I still was kind of like, this is big budget Hollywood. It doesn't really do anything for me. Fine, it's on while we're killing time, but I'm not a huge fan. But then in the early 2000s, I got out of college. I started to get into more, kind of prestige, independent directors. So I discovered people like Kurosawa, Fellini, Bergman, Godard. And of course, that brought me into contact with the Criterion Collection. I was just buying up all that I could. Barnes & Noble had its own little section of foreign art house movies that I'd pick up Criterion films there. Go to Bull Moose Records in Portsmouth to see used versions, used copies of stuff. And even just buying them online, Amazon, you could get them on Amazon or stuff like that. And I out of college, I didn't really have a good job out of college. I was washing dishes in the kitchen while I was trying to get into grad school. But it's still, as a kid, right, when you're making any kind of money. And at that time, again, in the early 2000s, you could make enough washing dishes that, rent was low enough, food costs were low enough that you could have, extra money that you could blow on things like that. And so I developed this collection. And I remember seeing the Rock Criterion at Bull Moose Records used. And I was like, why would the Criterion Collection be doing a Michael Bay movie? This is really fascinating, and in a way, it gave it a stamp of approval for me that that it wouldn't have already otherwise had. Right, I would have thought I was too good for The Rock, and so when I got at home and started watching the commentary and kind of reading some of the pamphlet stuff and the way that they were talking about the movie, I was seeing it from a different perspective, and understanding it as this sort of this over-the-top fun action romp, I had a different appreciation for it. Now, again, you could say that my different appreciation was just the Criterion giving it its stamp of approval. That's certainly a valid excuse or a valid commentary on my thoughts there. But I think as I've gotten older, I've learned to appreciate these things in different ways as well. And I think that's where The Rock comes in as something that I appreciate in a different way than I did before. again, thinking about some of the things that happen in The Rock, one of the big things for me with The Rock is just like the number of character actors that you get in this movie. One of the greatest all-time character actor scenes ever, I think, is when you get David Morse and John C. McGinley in one scene together. I don't even know, like, that's just like a mind-blowing kind of deal, like to have those two in the same shot. I mean, the only thing that would have made it better, I guess, I was trying to think of who else you'd put in a shot like that, right? William Sadler. Because what's funny, right, is we get these two sort of like wannabe young versions of William Sadler. Like there's like the guy who's with the military people that he's like this young guy, and Ed Harris says like somebody should put tape over his mouth or something because he's obnoxious. He's like a young William Sadler, and then also there's a part of Ed Harris's gang, right? The guy who ends up like causing all the issues at the end. He's kind of a young William Sadler as well. So it's almost like having William Sadler in a scene with David Morse and John C. McGinley, or having them together, would have been way too much. And so they're like, we can't have that much character actor talent on the screen at one time. So unfortunately, you're out, William Sadler. He's almost kind of like the Madonna on the We Are the World thing, right? Where if you've seen that documentary recently about the We Are the World, where they were recording it after the I think it was the Billboard Music Awards in 1985, and they were filming it at A&R Records, and it shows them like interviewing Huey Lewis, like kind of doing a press thing or whatever after the awards, and they're asking him about it, and Madonna's just standing there like, oh, why wasn't I invited? I guess that's maybe unfortunately what happens to William Sadler with this movie. But again, I think the David Morse, John C. McGinley scene, that's the kind of thing that I really appreciate now as a movie fan. I just I love seeing character actors do character actor things like that, and seeing them in the same scene is really fantastic. I think in the 90s, seeing that, I'd be like, oh, it's those guys again. Yeah, of course this movie's got to have those guys in it. It's that kind of a movie. So the kind of thing that would turn me off in the 90s is something that I really appreciate now and love. And I mean, we get other names. We get William Forsythe. I mean, just really fantastic performance that he turns in. The late Tony Todd. I mean, how do you not love the late Tony Todd, showing up? And of course, Bokeem Woodbine, who's been on the site plenty of times with, doing a lot of movies. He's great, as well as another great character actor. Steve Harris, who we end up seeing on what is The Practice, right? I think he does The Practice. But yeah, he's the one who takes pleasure in gutting you, boy. So you get these names in here, and I think it's always kind of fun to see that kind of thing. And then some of the other actors, like Claire Forlani, has one scene in the movie, but it's enough. Vanessa Marcel, if you remember, like I think she was kind of tapped to be maybe another leading lady kind of on that level. She ends up doing like 90210 and stuff like that. She does the show Las Vegas, but she never quite makes it into that bigger realm of leading ladies. Monica Potter, who we're going to see in the next movie, same thing, right? She doesn't quite make it into that realm of leading ladies, where they're just always in these kinds of movies, but they're here. Don't want to forget Michael Biehn as well. Michael Biehn, he's kind of fun in this as well. One of the things, I was looking at the trivia, and somebody put for trivia the fact that in this and The Abyss, he had shoulder-mounted cams, and they said that was trivia. And I was like, that's not trivia. That's not how trivia works. Michael Biehn playing roles where he's got shoulder-mounted cams in two movies is not really trivia for me. But anyway, he is in this. He's got a shoulder-mounted cam. He's definitely Michael Biehn. So all that stuff that I think in the 90s I wouldn't have been as big a fan of, I appreciate now. The other thing I noticed in watching this was that Michael Bay has a way of shooting. So I think he came from music videos. He came from commercials as well, I believe. And he has a way of shooting things that, like, he shoots scenes that are perfect for the promo. And it was kind of something that struck me about this, was that there's actual scenes that I can remember being in the commercials. Like there's the whole car accident thing in the car chase with where Sean Connery breaks out with a Hummer and he's like smashing up things. And there's a whole like the trolley car is blowing up, and you get that shot of Nicolas Cage from kind of like from underneath that goes up and over him that was used in the commercials, and it looks exactly like that from the commercial. Or when one of the balls with the poison in it is like rolling away from him, he's trying to catch it towards the end of the movie. And that scene that was in the commercial, it's almost like Michael Bay was shooting the commercial at the same time he's shooting the movie. And I think that's, again, something that, at the time I would have seen that would have turned me off, right? Just like, oh, it's just another one of these movies. It's another one of these kind of things. That seeing it now, I don't know, I appreciate it more. I like it more. So, I mean, I don't think it's necessary for me to do a synopsis on this movie. I think you know the story, right? That Ed Harris and his crew, they take over a tour group on Alcatraz. They've got VX rockets with nerve gas that they're going to shoot into San Francisco if they get their chance. But Sean Connery, this former SAS spy who's got the goods on a lot of U.S. bad secrets, He's been in prison for 30 years, but he'd escaped Alcatraz. So he's the guy who's going to show the Navy SEALs how to get in. And then Nicolas Cage, he's the expert on defusing bombs, dealing with nerve bombs, poison gas, all that kind of stuff. He's the expert on that. So he and Connor are going to go in together and try to, help these Navy SEAls out. But then the Navy SEAls get wiped out, and it's up to the two of them to save the day, which, fortunately they do. They take care of business there. But yeah, I mean, again, going back to, Sean Connery, I think it's another thing with Sean Connery is that as I've gotten older, I've appreciated him more. And I think at that time it was, he's still very close to when he kind of blew back up, right? If you think of that, was it The Untouchables that he does that really kind of brings him back? But I was thinking Medicine Man is one I remember we watched in our biology class. So, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, all this. He's kind of doing these big name movies at that time. So I didn't have like kind of the love for him that I have now. Again, something like Hunt for Red October, I think I appreciate him as a Scotsman playing a Russian now, that back in the 90s, I was like, this is hokey crap. I don't care about this. Or Highlander 2 is another one, right? You can't die, McLeod, except I came back to life, McLeod. It's like, yeah, I don't think I appreciate it like I do now, where it's like now I see him in a movie and it's like, oh, I mean, he's just fantastic. Like the way he's just, every scene he's in, he's commanding the entire room. And I mean, the sequence where he's confronting Ed Harris towards the end of the movie, and Ed Harris is just not even, like, you just know that Ed Harris can't compete with this guy, that everything that Sean Connery is saying and doing is just taking over the whole film. And again, I think it's perfect for Nicolas Cage, because then Nicolas Cage can be fully the Nicolas Cage he wants to be. I'd heard that he changed his character name from, I think it was supposed to be John Goodspeed. He changed it to Stanley Goodspeed. There were a lot of things that he ad-libbed. The thing about buying the Beatles album on LP and not CD, because he liked to sound better for LP on LPs than he did, or on albums than he did on vinyl versus CDs. That was him. That was his own feeling about music at that time, that he was feeling like the CDs weren't producing the sound the way he wanted. That was kind of more of a niche opinion at that time that later became much more established. But I think there were a lot of, especially yuppies at that time, that were like, let's convert all of our vinyl to CDs because it's cooler, right? To be able to skip around and have this like really fancy electronic set. I mean, think of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, right? The whole thing, it was Nicholas Guest and Julie Louis-Dreyfus, right? Their whole CD system that gets destroyed by the tree. That kind of thing, that was a big deal. But also for people my age, it was a lot more accessible for us to have CDs and then to have these whole big vinyl sets. Then I think as people got older, they started switching over from that. But he was having that opinion then in the mid 90s, which was a little bit, like I said, it was a little bit newer at that time, but it still made a lot of sense. I mean, there was, just the way he's delivering lines, which again, I think are lines that he is, he's ad-libbing in a lot of cases. It's almost like I'm going to do this big budget action movie, but I'm still going to be Nicolas Cage in this big budget action movie. And Hollywood was okay with it. I mean, this movie was like a top 3 or top 4 earner for its year in 1996. Even with someone like myself who was too good to go see a movie like that. I mean, I knew my friends did go see it, so it wasn't just all my friends that were too good to go see something like that. Other people did definitely see it. People appreciated it. And I think it wouldn't be the movie it is without Nicolas Cage. I think if you had subbed him in for anybody else that they were thinking about having play that part, it wouldn't have worked. Just like I don't think it would work if, like, for example, they wanted Schwarzenegger to play Connery's part. I don't think it works either there. I think you needed to have Connery there. And Connery was the one who, he not only got what Nicolas Cage was doing, right, and just sort of was able to play off him well, he got what Michael Bay was doing. And there were times where Buena Vista and Disney didn't want Michael Bay to do the movie a certain way. And, Connery found out, like, when the meetings were happening, he just showed up and just completely backed Michael Bay, and they were like, well, we can't argue with Sean Connery, And so that's another area of this had this been more Disneyfied, it probably would have been the movie I thought it was when I was seeing commercials for it. And again, it's not so violent. I mean, you get a few deaths in it. Obviously all the baddies get shot up. There was a massacre of the Navy SEALs. So it's like, yeah, you get some, but there's no like real innocent people getting killed or anything like that. And again, you get really great action moments. They're just so over the top actiony. Like the car chase in San Francisco is fantastic. And San Francisco itself, it's not like New York where it's its own character in a movie. It's like San Francisco I don't know how to explain San Francisco, especially to people who haven't been before, how it differs from New York in that sense, where New York is its own character. There's a sense when you're in New York that the city itself is either actively trying to harm or help you, if that makes sense. It feels like a living entity, that the people of New York are just coping with the fact that the city is this sort of living entity. That's how big and massive it is. Whereas San Francisco feels like the people and the city itself have kind of a symbiotic relationship, that you're sort of interacting with both the city and its people as one unit that's a little bit different in that sense. And so in that sense, when you see things like the car chase and stuff like that, there's almost like there's a symbiosis that you're watching play out around you of the people, the hills, the topography, all of that in San Francisco, that kind of all comes together with the trolley car smashing up and the trolley car driver getting all pissed about it and everything. San Francisco is a really, really fun city. If you haven't been, it's a little bit hard, especially for our listeners in Europe, because you got to go all the way across the United States. I mean, thinking about it, like from New York, a flight from New York to San Francisco it's only a slightly longer than, say, like New York to London, I think. So just to give you a sense of how far it is, but it's definitely worth checking out. You'll probably see a lot of things on TV about crime, homelessness, drug use, and things like that being really bad in San Francisco. Don't pay any attention to those things. They're just sort of, San Francisco is one of those cities that the right really doesn't like, because it's one of those places that's always been offbeat and always has had this exchange of ideas and cultures that it's always sort of, I don't know, say, for the longest time, it was always sort of a hotbed for the counterculture in America. That has changed a bit with the whole Silicon Valley tech bro thing, where it is a little bit more sort of, I don't know if I want to say standard or less offbeat. That is certainly the case. It's an expensive city. That's one thing. I mean, it's not as expensive as New York, but it's up there. It's a pretty expensive to go to. But thinking about it from 1996, before the real the tech bro thing was starting to take off a little bit. You had Apple was big at that time, but you didn't have a lot of them, right? You didn't have Facebook. You didn't have Twitter, or X or whatever. A lot of those ones didn't exist at that time. Google, right? Google wasn't a thing in the mid 90s, I don't think. I was trying to think because we were still using like Alta Vista back then, right? And the for our search window, was a web crawler or something like that. So it was a different San Francisco then. I got a chance. I was lucky enough to go there in 2000, and I've been there recently as well for work things, and it is a beautiful city. So and that car chase really, really, really exemplifies that, which I thought was a really cool touch there as well. So. Yeah, I was trying to think of what other things that I had on this movie. So I've kind of exhausted my notes, but I feel like there's things that I didn't put in my notes that I wanted to mention. I mean, one of the things I remember from the commercials were the green balls that had the gas in them. The trivia said that was Prel. I don't know if you remember Prel shampoo. That's the kind of stuff we would use for shampoo. I guess you still use. I don't know. Like I think of like the Head and Shoulders stuff that I use. It just sort of looks like a bluish cream, right? It doesn't look like some kind of like gel that could pass for a nerve gas agent in an action movie. But I just imagining some PA having to go to like a store. Which again, nowadays, right? If you went to a place in San Francisco to buy Prel, if you could even find it, it would be locked up behind a counter. You'd have to get like somebody at Target to like go fetch it for you. So it would be a pain to do that. And you say you want to buy up all of it, they'd probably be a little bit curious about it. Because one of the techniques I know in terms of, retail theft is not the main issue that companies have made it out to be. We've discovered that a lot of retail giants like Target, et cetera, they inflated retail theft as a way to to explain bad numbers when really retail theft wasn't that bad. But I have seen some techniques play out in front of me here in Philadelphia where like somebody might steal, grab up all the Prel, for example, or something like that. The person I saw doing it was a whole bunch of like kind of fiber supplement kind of stuff, like powder, I don't know, it's not Cetaphil, but something similar to that. A name similar to that. They had like 5 or 6 containers of it, and they were trying to return it at a different Rite Aid I was in line in. And the guy's like, well, do you have the receipt? No, my mom. We got it from my mom. We don't have the receipt. It was like all these questions, and they didn't really have any good answers. They had stolen it from somewhere else, and they were trying to get money by returning it to another place. So there are techniques like that I guess, someone would probably think you're doing the same thing if you went to a Target in the San Francisco area and just bought up all the Prel, right? They'd be like, oh, this person's going to try to flip this or something like that. I don't know. But I guess if you're buying it, it's not as bad, right, as if you're shoplifting it. But it's just kind of those little touches with those movies that I just absolutely love. I think, again, again, the Nicolas Cage piece of it, it's one of those things where, as we go on and we watch more of his movies in the 2000s, like these movies like Next, that just, they weren't screened for critics. They, I think like the National Treasure movies, things like that. You get less of this Nicolas Cage, this sort of younger, more vibrant, just, quirky, ready to just do whatever Nicolas Cage. One of the things I didn't know was that the scene where Vanessa Marcel comes to the apartment and early in the movie, and he's essentially naked playing the guitar when she shows up, that was him complaining to Michael Bay that he wanted a shirtless scene because he had worked out, because he was like all excited for his first action movie. So he had worked out, and he kept wanting a topless scene, and Bay's like, well, there isn't a scene for you to be topless. That's not how this character is written. So they had to write this scene into it just to make him happy. So those are little quirks or little pieces of this movie that just make it so much fun. So, this is a movie, I think, this is one of those ones that, it's got a lot of rewatchability. It's about a little over 2 hours long. I think it's like 2:15. But it is a lot of fun. I was trying to think of what I didn't like about it. I mean, it is a little bit obnoxious that poor Sean Connery's character spends 30 years in prison. That seems to be a little bit rough, but otherwise, I hate to think about the people who are being held hostage, because that would suck to be one of those cells if you got to go to the bathroom or whatever. But you never think about the hostages, right? That's not really how it is. It's just people that are there. It's not really about how difficult your day is and how much everything is screwing up your life to have to be stuck in a situation like that, right? That's not how we're supposed to think about those movies. I also, Ed Harris, I think, again, he's another piece of this that I like watching him now, but he's another piece of it that in the 90s I'd be like, oh, it's Ed Harris again. It's like all these names that were just all over these TNT New Classic kind of movies that made me not want to watch them. I watch them now and I appreciate the performances and all of that. So I think this one, it was a lot of fun coming back to it. Again, I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it. It probably was when I got that Criterion, which would have been in the early 2000s. So it's probably been about 20, maybe not quite 25 years, but over 20, maybe 22, 23 years, something like that. Because I did watch that with the Michael Bay. Was it that long ago that Criterion would have come out? It may have been more recent than that. So it may have been like mid to late 2000s when I picked that up on Criterion. Actually, that makes that I don't know. It's hard to say, right? It's hard to know when you last saw these things. But anyway, I watched it now. Definitely enjoyed it. I think this was a lot of fun. And I think they don't really make action like this anymore. They do, I guess, for maybe for Netflix. Like, this is not a movie that you would get on the big screen, I don't think, anymore. Even with these names, I don't think. I mean, maybe now if they were making a sequel because the first one was so established. But if you came to Hollywood with this new premise and a script, it probably would be like straight to Netflix, straight to Amazon, something like that. I mean, the budget, I think, here was $75 million. I think is something like that, $75 million. So it would probably be $75 million, just sort of the absolute value of $75 million. That's probably what you get for a budget now. Not $75 million in 1996 dollars, but $75 million in 2025 dollars. To be able to make something like this, it probably wouldn't take place. They wouldn't let you shoot on Alcatraz, right? The studio wouldn't let you shoot there, so you'd be in a back lot that recreated Alcatraz. Again, you probably could get Nicolas Cage, right? Nicolas Cage could even play Sean Connery's character potentially, or I should think who you would get to play Sean Connery's character if you were going to remake this, or if somebody was going to propose a movie like this today. I mean, it would be kind of a fun direct-to-video concept, right? If you had Dolph and I don't know. I mean, this lines itself up perfectly for an Emmett Furlow Oasis movie. Right? This could have just been chock full of cynicism and just like really bad low budget filmmaking. But you imagine like Bruce Willis as Sean Connery's character, and then name the young actor to play the Nicolas Cage character: Chad Michael Murray, Jesse Metcalf, Jesse whatever, any of those, Patrick Bergin, Mark Paul Gosselaar, and they're like breaking in. I don't even know who the baddie would be, right? Would you get, Timothy V. Murphy would be the baddie, maybe somebody like that. Just a complete one note. But you could see, something like an Emmett Furlow Oasis, they would love the idea of a movie taking place in a prison like this, because it's just one set, one location, do everything on the cheap, and you're good to go. So I think Hollywood would take a movie like this and or off Hollywood, right? Direct-to-video studios would take a movie like this and completely crush it. Just completely make it less of what it is. Get it out there. Get some names on the tin. Get some streams. Call it good. Make your money back if you can. And so it is a little bit sad watching something like this, knowing that we get these movies because we had these movies in the 90s, but there really isn't a market for them anymore, which I do think is sad. And it's kind of fun watching this now, knowing that I can watch this at any time. I've got the DVD for sure, so it's one of the few that I can say I own on physical media. But it was a little bit like watching it. I was like, I think it's another reason why I like it so much now is that they don't make movies like this anymore. If they do, they're not the same level of this. You wouldn't get Hollywood to be able to greenlight something like this anymore. Unless you made it a Captain America movie or something like that, right? You tack some existing IP to it. So there's that as well. But anyway, why don't we take a stop here? We'll take a break here. You can hear me talk about my newest novel, Nadia and Aiden. And then when we come back, we'll take a look at Con Air. Check out my newest release, Nadia and Aiden, available now. Told in a unique, dual first-person narration style, Nadia and Aiden explores what it means to be American from the standpoint of two kids who grew up in France with an American mother. It also looks at how we define family beyond DNA and blood relations, when life isn't always that simple. You can find Nadia and Aiden on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and Kindle Unlimited. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we're going to wrap this up by looking at Con Air. So comes right after, like 1 year after The Rock, and the interesting thing is that I think because Nicolas Cage, forms a relationship with Jerry Bruckheimer, when Bruckheimer makes this movie, now the deal with Con Air was that Bruckheimer and Don Simpson didn't agree on this movie. Don Simpson actually didn't like the idea of this movie. They had agreed to dissolve their partnership during The Rock, and then Simpson ends up passing away anyway. But so he was going to go forward with this movie on his own, regardless of whether Don Simpson had passed or not. But this was a movie that Don Simpson wasn't all that interested in. But I think this is something when it comes to these kinds of movies where Nicolas Cage, even if The Rock doesn't come off as well as it ends up doing, and I think it's a better movie than Con Air, The Rock creates the relationship with Jerry Bruckheimer that he can then make a Con Air and sort of make more of these kinds of movies. So it opens the door, and I think that's a big piece of this kind of thing. I think we talked about with Sydney Sweeney when she did Madam Web, right? That opened up the door for Immaculate and other movies. She essentially creates a relationship with Sony. So even if Madam Web ends up being a dud, or then maybe has a cult following, or whatever ends up happening with it, either way, she's formed those relationships. I think that's what happens here with Nicolas Cage. Sort of again, just furthering his stardom here, and further cementing him as that person kind of right below Tom Cruise is those actors from the 60s and them kind of becoming these big names. Now, a couple of names I did forget to mention when I was talking about those big names, those big those leading men from the early 60s. I mean, one is Michael J. Fox, right? Michael J. Fox, of course, was huge in the 80s. And he would have been, I think he was born in 61, so he's about the same age as Tom Cruise. And he was really tapped to be that next big leading man. Now, we know, of course, the Parkinson's diagnosis, I think Doc Hollywood is when he discovers that he has it, but he still ends up making Spin City. Really, the film career didn't take off the way I think he was expecting it to. The Back to the Future movies were big, but, the Teen Wolf was good enough, but, he doesn't really have the big hits that he was expecting. So he doesn't really become the big star that people were expecting him to be. So that's another area, another name that kind of falls off that, a name like Nicolas Cage could kind of slot in and sort of fill that spot. And then Keanu Reeves was one that I forgot to mention. And Keanu Reeves was someone whose star was kind of dropping a bit in the 90s, right? He takes off big in the late 80s, early 90s, and he is this big-time leading man who's in all kinds of things. Again, more like younger romantic movies, but also action movies, right? He does Speed, so he's kind of a versatile all-around actioner all-around leading man who could do all kinds of things. But as the 90s went on, I think there was almost like a sense of like, this it was almost, I don't want to say it was a joke, but it was kind of this, Special Agent Johnny Utah kind of thing with him. Johnny Mnemonic doesn't really do well. And so he's kind of starting to fade a little bit. And then all of a sudden The Matrix, right? He does The Matrix, blows up, just, completely crushes that. Then kind of falls back again. And then, the John Wick movies kind of create another level of stardom for him. But again, he's a name that because he's sort of starting to trail off a bit in the mid 90s, that you could, slot somebody in there, that there's a spot for somebody to come in. And that's, again, a place where Nicolas Cage was able to kind of, blow through the doors there. And again, I think he really establishes himself as this sort of that second lead in the early, for guys that were born in the early mid '60s after Tom Cruise. And then of course, as we get into the 2000s, we start to get those guys that were born in the late '60s who start to sort of take some of those over. So we get Matthew McConaughey, right, big name there. Everybody really liked him in Dazed and Confused. He starts to become a romantic lead because again, these other guys are starting to age out even quicker. So you get him, and then interesting thing with McConaughey, right, when he does finally win an Oscar, he goes through a period where he just says, I won't do another romantic comedy. His agent was not happy about that, as you can imagine, but he just would not take a single script for a romantic comedy. He's like, okay, I've done enough of these things. I've made enough money. It's time for me to move on. I say he's made enough money. He's getting paid $10 million by Salesforce to do their AI ads. So remember that was a Super Bowl ad where he's like sitting in the rain while Woody Harrelson's across the street, in a nice location. It's like, I don't even know how AI does that or what that means, but whatever, whatever it is. But so it's another piece to it. When you think about these windows for these actors, it doesn't take a lot of duds or a lot of movies that don't do as well for them to fall off. I mean, Tom Cruise is one that has that happen to him. You think of like that late 2000s period where, people were kind of tired of the act. They the whole jumping on the couch on Oprah, the Scientology, stuff like that. And he's doing like, Lions and Lambs, movies that weren't that big. Night and Day, I think, was the one he did with Cameron Diaz. It wasn't really that big either. But he does that really great like cameo, small part in Tropic Thunder. And then, he starts to rebuild things with the Mission Impossible movies that he had the rights to. Takes on the Jack Reacher movies, which doesn't make any sense that he's playing Jack Reacher, but I guess people accept it. And he's able to sort of rebuild himself and kind of go back in without much of a drop-off. Whereas Nicolas Cage, right, we know what happens with him, right? The 2000s aren't that kind to him, and he loses a lot of money. He overspends, and he spends about 10 years in the direct-to-video world, right? Between like 2013 and 2014, he's just banging out direct-to-video films. It looks like he's maybe emerging from that now. So it's kind of interesting to think about how soon that happens. What we're talking about here, what Nicolas Cage establishes here in the mid-90s, it lasts a good, 10 years or so, maybe 15 years before it then falls off, and then he kind of has to rebuild it after another 10-year period. Now he's in his 60s, right, and he's kind of making this comeback into more mainstream films again. But it is interesting to look at that window, where this is happening here with him, where he's sort of establishing himself. And again, we talked about with The Rock in the previous segment that he has really firmly established himself as an action lead. And then this movie, this Con Air movie, comes out. I think it was a movie that people like Schwarzenegger and Stallone were offered the part, and they turned it down. I mean, when you look at the script, it doesn't look like something that people would want to do. It's kind of a hokey premise, a hokey concept for a film. And what's interesting, again, is that you give the movie to Nicolas Cage, and he starts coming up with all these ideas. Okay, well, I think the character should be from Alabama. That wasn't something that was in the script necessarily. I think he should be an Army Ranger. Again, something that wasn't in the script exactly. I'm going to spend some time living in Alabama so I can pick up that accent. Why? Well, who does that, right? You don't see like Bruce Willis, like, I guess he did. Did he hang out with New York cops? I mean, he didn't live with them for 6 months to learn how to be a New York cop for Die Hard, did he? Yeah, I don't think he did anything like that. But that's what Nicolas Cage is bringing to this movie. And so he's already starting to develop his character in this way that's going to make this film quirkier. And then, with the villain, I think they talked about a bunch of different people that they wanted for the villain. They end up landing on John Malkovich. And of course, he does like a whole next level performance. Now, he has dumped on this movie since then. I mean, I think what was it? There was he was doing something on was it Graham Norton or somebody with I think it was with Samuel L. Jackson, and somebody said, you guys have never done a movie together, and Samuel L. Jackson's like, well, he only does smart films, and John Michael said, I did Con Air. That wasn't a smart movie. It's like, if that's a smart movie, then I'm an astronaut or something like that. So but I mean, obviously a really fun character there as well. And again, this movie is kind of your parade of character actors. I mean, the other name, of course, in this is John Cusack. And John Cusack he was born in '66, so he's a couple years younger than Nicolas Cage. But he was somebody that I think was also being tapped to be a next, big leading man. But they weren't sure about, right, how that would work with him. But again, it's kind of similar to with Nicolas Cage to Tom Cruise, right? Where he's a few years younger than Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise has already sort of carved out this path, this space, and so Nicolas Cage has got to kind of find his spots in and around that, like what Tom Cruise has already established. I think John Cusack was kind of a similar thing. Like, okay, here's Nicolas Cage who's already established himself as doing these quirkier, more offbeat roles. Where's John Cusack going to find his space in there? There was a sense of like, okay, can he do an action movie? And one of the things that Cusack said was that the fact that Cage was doing this and Malkovich was doing this, that's what got him involved, because he looked at the script and he didn't see much in here either. He thought this was kind of a fugazi movie. So, yeah, I mean, maybe it's good for us to kind of get stuck in on it. Again, this was one that I saw in college. My roommate had a friend who was a big fan of the movie, and he had us watch it. My roommate at the time, we had kind of a similar take on these action movies. We liked the low budget stuff. We liked, firing up a Roddy Piper or Dolph Lundgren movie or something like that. I mean, one of the things that he and I did was my friend Forrest. We would watch like TNT Monday Night Nitro, and then watch like whatever bad actioner would be on after that. So I remember like Jerry Trimble, was it Terminator Woman was on one of those ones. I'm trying to think what Piper movies, because there were some Piper movies in there. Virtual Assassin, aka Cyberjack, was one of those ones. So we would watch those and have fun with those kinds of movies. So it wasn't like we were didn't like action at all, but like the big screen, big budget kind of action was not something we were really keen on. And his friend was like, his friend like loved all of like the put the bunny down jokes and that poor bunny's getting run through the ringer and all that. Like he loved all of the bad humor in this, which I think turned me off to it more. Turned my roommate Forrest off to it more. We weren't really big fans of it. So it was kind of one of those movies that I left for a while. And I think the other thing about it was, I think it had sort of established this idea in my head of like this concept of Nicolas Cage versus the actual Nicolas Cage. And it is an interesting thing, because if you were to ask me at that time, in the 90s, even into the 2000s, what do you think of Nicolas Cage? I would think of the concept of Nicolas Cage and be like, oh yeah, he's just, whatever, he's just doing these big budget movies, all this stuff. But then if you said to me like, well, what do you think of Leaving Las Vegas? Oh, I love that movie. I love Cage's performance in that movie. He's fantastic, Moonstruck. Oh yeah, love Nicolas Cage in Moonstruck. Yeah, what a great performance he turns in there. So fantastic, Peggy Sue Got Married. Oh yeah, of course I love him in Peggy Sue Got Married, so it was like this concept of him that was different from the actual Nicolas Cage that I appreciated and loved. One that I think of is The Family Man. I remember I was seeing a young woman. I was kind of my last year of college, the summer before this, like 2001, and seeing this young woman. We were having a date at her house. She was staying with her parents, and she was insistent that I watch The Family Man with her, and I just like, this movie is horrible. And I didn't say that. I didn't just come out and say this movie is horrible, but the whole time in my head, I'm thinking this movie's horrible. I can't handle this. And I remember like she was picking up these things because she took a film class, and she's like, oh, like look at how the cross shows in this scene and it kind of disappears. Whereas I'm thinking in my head like, this is so paint by numbers, right? I'm looking at it from a film standpoint in a completely different way. I'm like, okay, here's the scene where the kids think that he's the real Nicolas Cage, because, or the real dad or whatever, because he's become so enamored with being a dad, right, that he's changed his mind on them, and now he's fooled the kids even, or whatever. It's just that kind of thing where it's just like, I can't do this anymore. So full disclosure with her, her favorite movie was Pay It Forward, so she made me watch that. That is one of the, for me, like when it comes to movies I can't stand, that one is on that list. I remember she fell asleep before the end of it, and she woke up, she's like, what did you think of it? And I was like, they killed Haley Joel Osment's character. Like, why would you do that? Like, that's just so mean-spirited and horrible. And the whole thing just felt gross to me. So, so we didn't last that long. One of the things I also remember, so she had two kids that were young, and I remember I was at the mall with her one time, and I was pushing the younger of the two in a stroller, and realized like, oh man, if any of my mom's friends see me at the mall pushing kids in a stroller, it's going to be over, right? I was like 22, 23 at that time. So I was like, I got to tell my mom that I'm dating somebody that has kids, And usually, how it usually works, like that you don't usually tell your family that you're dating someone until it's like a serious relationship, because, you don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't know if they're going to show you, Family Man or Pay It Forward, right? And it's not going to work out between them or whatever. But yeah, so I had to tell my mom about it. And then it was like one of those things where she would ask me about it. I was like, yeah, it's not, it's not really working. It didn't work out or whatever. You don't want to have that conversation, but I had to, because I was like, man, if I'm at the mall any more times and one of my mom's friends, you know how mom's friends are, right? You know how you if you had a close relationship with your mom, or you know your mom, and your mom has friends, right? Yeah, they see a friend's son pushing a stroller, they're gonna be like, what's going on with that, huh? When did Matt get kids? So, and again, I was like only 22, 23 at that time, so it would have been a huge deal. So anyway, just a kind of an aside on sort of my Nicolas Cage experience at that time in the early 2000s, and sort of how I wasn't a big fan of him, despite the fact that I was a fan of him, right? If you were really to push me on some of his actual movies. And it's an interesting thing when you think about that, because usually it's the other way around, right? Usually it's the concept of something you like, but when you dig in and you actually do it, you're not a big fan of it, and I think Nicolas Cage is the other way around, right? It's like the concept of him at that time was ridiculous, and I wasn't a big fan of it. I remember seeing National Treasure with my friends, and we just kind of weren't. None of us liked it. And the thing I remember the most was every time his character's name was Gates, every time they said his name, I would say McFadden. So like, oh, Gates, and I go McFadden, and that never got old for my friends. Like that should have gotten old pretty quickly, but the movie was so bad that they just appreciated it, that I guess also being Trekkies, of course, any kind of Gates McFadden reference that you can make always works as well. But yeah, and I think Con Air, I think even as far back as Con Air, I'd somehow develop, which again, that's only like 2 years removed from Leaving Las Vegas, where I really loved him in Leaving Las Vegas, that I already had this sense of him as this big screen guy who only does big screen drivel, and I'm not really a fan and I don't really care. It didn't take long, right, for me. And I guess that, again, shows sort of my own mindset of movies at that time, that if it was a big screen thing, again, this is another Jerry Bruckheimer film, just the name Jerry Bruckheimer, was enough to turn me off. And so that was kind of how I felt about this. And again, seeing it that time with my roommate, Forrest, and his friend when we were in college, and the friend yucking up all the bad jokes and us being like not a big fan, again, still wasn't a big fan of it. That would have been probably, again, like 25 years ago. And I hadn't seen this since. I'd had in my head, okay, I've seen the movie. That's enough. Con Air, good to go. But I saw the opportunity to see it for this. I thought it would be kind of fun to revisit it, see how my tastes have changed over time. And I think it's going to be interesting. It was interesting, I think, to kind of look at it that way. Because I think the other thing, again, is I saw this right after seeing The Rock. And I don't think this is anywhere near as good a movie as The Rock. I think there are a lot of things with this movie that I watched and I was like, that especially now in my mid to late 40s, that didn't really sound good. The fact that like the character, Cameron Poe, I guess was his name, that he gets 7 years in prison for essentially defending himself and defending his wife. Yes, he did maybe, start something with character actor Kevin Gage, Waingro, right? We get Waingro, uncredited Waingro in this film. But he gives him the old Riker to the nose. I also think, didn't Bruce Willis give somebody the palm to the nose, and you essentially shove the person's nose up into their brain and they die? That was where you killed people in movies. But yeah, Riker was big on that, right? Riker would give somebody the palm, and he'd give it to somebody in Next Generation. So more Star Trek, right? You got to always get more Star Trek in here. But that's what happens, right? Is his character kills somebody and he gets 7 years in prison, and then when he's getting out, he gets to go on this big ship, this big plane that's taking some of the worst criminals to another place, and those criminals end up hijacking the plane. So he's essentially now undercover. He's the fly in the ointment. They tried to call it Die Hard on a Plane, but I'm going to get into why it doesn't fit as Die Hard on a Plane. I think they mitigate some elements of this, and I think we're going to talk about that in a second when we get into why some parts of this movie work. But yeah, he's the fly in the ointment. On the ground, you've got John Cusack as the kind of the lead marshal who is doing the transport, who he recognizes that Cameron Poe could potentially be an ally for them, and he kind of works with him to sort of try to, take out the baddies together. More Star Trek, right? We got Colm Meaney as the jerk DEA agent. You got to have a jerk DEA agent, and who better than Colm Meaney for that role? So he's there. And again, John Malkovich as the main baddie is fantastic here. He's one of the few real saving graces of this movie that really makes it work, because he just does such a fantastic job. And then, again, our cavalcade of character actors, right? We've got MC Gainey. I think it's MC, right? It's MC Gainey, right? You gotta love MC Gainey. Dave Chappelle plays Pinball Parker. Ving Rhames, right? I guess he's a character actor in this sense, right? He's back, not that far removed from Pulp Fiction. You gotta have Nick Chinlund as a jerk off baddie kind of character in this, and of course you've got to have Danny Trejo. He does some really great work here. Steve Buscemi, again fresh off of Pulp Fiction, he plays a serial killer, real interesting character that we've got got there. Is Steve Easton. If you remember Steve Easton, I'm pretty sure, if I'm right, that he was in The Sweeper. He was the guy that I think he gets stabbed in The Sweeper when they do the ATM stakeout. If you remember in that film, I probably should have looked it up ahead of time just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that that's him. Yeah, The Sweeper. That's him. He plays Richard. His character name is Richard. But remember that sequence, right, where C. Thomas Howell has his House of Pain hat on, and then when I had Chris the Brain from Bulletproof on, when we talked about that movie, we were talking about how that ATM also had they had coupons for McDonald's when you got stuff at that ATM. So really great stuff. So I guess it's kind of fun to have him here in this film as well. Steve Easton, he plays the guard who's like transporting the criminals. So yeah, you gotta have him in there. And then Rachel Ticotin plays one of the guards. So we didn't have a character like her in The Rock, where there was like a woman on the inside, sort of, as part of this thing. Now, of course, we talked about Monica Potter being the love interest. She's the woman, the woman he's in the relationship with. So she's the Vanessa Marcel character. Her career goes a little bit further than Marcel's. She does, Along Came a Spider, was it? Or yeah, I think that was the one that she did. So kind of after Ashley Judd. That was kind of the role she was filling in. If you couldn't get Ashley Judd, you could get Monica Potter. But there was a certain point where it's like, we don't even need Ashley Judd anymore. And so if you don't need Ashley Judd, if she's not getting roles, what are we going to do with Monica Potter? And so, yeah, that was kind of it, for her. So she lasted a few movies. What did she do? Patch Adams, I think, as well. So not a lot of stuff there from her. But, like you said, we get our run of character actors that you need in a movie like this to kind of round out things. I guess maybe I don't know if I should do a synopsis. I mean, again, just like The Rock, you've probably seen it before, but right? Our hero, he's getting out of prison, and the baddies take over this plane. The whole idea is that they're trying to fly this plane for they're busting out a Colombian drug cartel guy. And so the idea is that they hijack the plane, they're going to go someplace else for that, but then, our fly in the ointment causes all these problems. And I think the fly in the ointment aspect is the only thing that makes this Die Hard-ish, because otherwise this isn't really a Die Hard film. I mean, one, for a plane slog, they understand how a plane slog works, and they make sure that they land the plane in a few different areas so that you can have situations happen in multiple locations, right? So you have this old abandoned airfield, you get shootouts there, kind of a pitched battle between the police and other people there. You get the huge ending in Las Vegas, which is really fun. Great, exciting sequence there where I think they were getting ready to demolish the Sands Hotel, so they let them blow up pieces of it. So those are things that, if this was just a plane slog, you wouldn't get. Right, so you get some added things, and I think there's an understanding that you can't just do Die Hard on a plane. That you couldn't make it. I mean, this movie's I think an hour and 45 minutes, hour and 55 actually, so it's almost 2 hours long. There's no way you could do 2 hours of a movie on just a plane. So the fact that they land in a few different locations and have pitched battles and action sequences there helps the movie along. I think it's one of the pieces about this that I really appreciated. There's definitely things about it to not like. I think again, this whole idea that the character in defending himself gets 7 years in prison. On the one hand, I think it would make sense if he was a black character, right? Like you definitely for that situation, yes. But I mean, and I also think too, like 1996, being a decorated veteran probably wouldn't go as far as it would 5 or 6 years later. 5 or 6 years later, that decorated veteran is not getting any jail time, right? For taking out some ne'er-do-wells at a bar. But I think even in this circumstance, and again, the guy who's his lawyer is John Deal from Miami Vice. So that's his one scene in the film where he tells Cameron Poe to take a plea, and the judge is like, well, hey, you're going to take the plea. I'm going to give you 7 years because, you're a trained killer as a Army service person. Which again, maybe if this judge still had some lingering issues with the Vietnam War, he might see it that way, but I doubt it. I think if you're defending yourself and defending your wife from ne'er-do-wells at a bar, even in Alabama, like they're going to look at that as like a self-defense kind of thing. They might give you some probation or something like that, but they're going to probably look at that as like, I don't know. I mean, I know it's a bigger thing when it's sort of on your home turf. I know like in Maine, there's the big case of the Sabina Raya case where this guy who owned a bar in Maine, his girlfriend had issues with some guys from her past, and they went to his his house to confront him, and he essentially executed all three of them. He kind of snuck out. It was at night, and he had a gun, and he snuck out at night and just took. I mean, one of them was actually taking a leak, and he was acquitted for murder. It was, I think, he was charged with second-degree murder, but the jury was just like, "Hey, you're defending yourself. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we won't convict you for that." Again, in this case, it wasn't a jury of his peers. Maybe that would have been different, right, if he had gone to a jury. But 7 years sounds like a long time for something like this, and I don't really see it working out that way. And it does seem like kind of a harsh sentence to give somebody 7 years. And they kind of just deal with 7 years like it's just 7 years. So that was a bit harsh. I thought that was a little bit rough. And again, something that, as an older person, realizing you lose 7 years of your life for something like that definitely sounds a lot harsher than it would if... as a kid, I was watching this, so that was kind of an issue there. We do have some transphobia, right? I guess you can't get out of a 90s movie without some. So the actor Renoli Santiago plays a character called Sally Can't Dance. It's like, whooping it up, getting a dress and dancing around and all that kind of stuff. I don't know why we even needed it. Even 1996, Matt watched that and was like, why do we need that? There's just not necessary. So if it's looking transphobic in the 90s, I mean, definitely now today where we have a better understanding of these things, or we kind of understand like what you can and can't do in movies, it definitely is really doesn't age well for sure. Wasn't necessary in there, but so that's another issue that I kind of had with the movie. But overall, it's just kind of an actioner. It just does what you need it to do, and I think, again, with us, looking at it from this time period versus the past, sometimes just doing what you needed to do is good enough, right? Just having an action movie that just does what you needed to do. But you do get the added element of the fun Nicolas Cage, who went to Alabama and picked up an Alabama accent and is excited to be using it in the film. His performance is really great there. Him playing off of John Malkovich's baddie is really great. Something you don't get in The Rock, right? Ed Harris is not the same kind of baddie that Malkovich is. He's more of like this sort of like potentially sympathetic figure. You're not sure, but he doesn't really act opposite Nicolas Cage at all. So you don't get any of those moments that you get here, where there's this cat and mouse element with the two of them that I thought was really fun the way it played out. And then you add in like a Ving Rhames to that, and it just is really great in the mix. Steve Buscemi, again, the Steve Buscemi thing is really interesting as well. He's a serial killer. He's understood to be a serial killer. He goes and sits and has tea with this girl, this little girl, when they're refueling at the abandoned airstrip area, and we think that maybe he killed her, but we find out he doesn't kill her. But at the end of the movie, he's just like playing craps in Vegas, and it's like, oh, that's great, a serial killer's just on the loose. That's fun. I don't know if there was a sense that maybe he's become reformed or something, and that's why it's okay. But it just seemed like kind of a weird applause moment at the end of a movie to have a serial killer on the loose. But hey, that's what this movie did, right? It did stuff like that. Again, the John Cusack element of this is a lot of fun. He's this sort of the slick young agent, almost in a way being the slick young agent that Nicolas Cage was in the previous movie, in The Rock. He's sort of slotting in as that same part, whereas Nicolas Cage is almost slotting in as Sean Connery's part in this movie, which is interesting to see that again, those two are only a couple years different in age, but from a career standpoint, that's, they're already kind of in those roles. John Cusack does eventually start taking on some bigger roles. He does start to kind of slot into that big leading man kind of thing. Some interesting movies, though, that he gets right soon after this. I mean, something like a Grosse Pointe Blank, where Grosse Pointe Blank was big amongst my friends and my crew. We liked a movie like that, mostly because it had kind of more of an indie feel to it. The soundtrack was fantastic. I actually remember, I don't know if it was that one or the Trainspotting soundtrack. One of those, when I got it home, I tried to pull the CD out of the jewel case, and it split the CD. And I had to bring it back. And the woman who was working at Bull Moose didn't really believe that it happened. And I was like, I don't necessarily believe it myself. I would rather just have the CD be listening to it than have to bring it back and get a replacement version. It took forever for the replacement to come, too. It was kind of a mess. But I can't remember if it was the Grosse Pointe Blank CD or the Trainspotting soundtrack CD, but either one of those two. I think, I had them both. Definitely, really like them. But I was trying to think like where he comes, after Con Air. I mean, he's doing like, a movie like The Thin Red Line, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. High Fidelity, of course, that's another one that we always know him from. But yeah, then he starts getting to things like Serendipity, right, where it's like, okay, Cusack is our leading man, Must Love Dogs, right, those kinds of movies. And again, for him, it doesn't last as long either. By the time we're wrapping up the 2000s, he does 2012. That's kind of his big budget action movie kind of thing where he's making a lot of money and all of that. But soon after, we're Hot Tub Time Machine, right? Which kind of felt like that was kind of, an interesting movie for him. But that's 2010. And in 2013, we did an episode, the early iteration of the podcast with Jamie, where we did Frozen Ground, where you have that really interesting scene with Nicolas Cage and John Cusack together in that film. So he was already in the direct-to-video world at that point. It comes quick for him, too. He doesn't really bounce back the way that Nicolas Cage has, I don't think. He also seemed to have taken it a little bit harsher. If you see him on Twitter, right, he'd have these drunken tweet storms where the tweets were kind of garbled and a mess, and he would talk about aging out in Hollywood and how you can't get roles, which sounds like an interesting thing, because I remember Jack Nicholson playing leading men well into like his 60s or 70s. Richard Gere was in the 2000s still playing things like he was Unfaithful, movies like that. He was born in 49. So you wonder if there was more to John Cusack aging out than that, but there is a sense of resentment when you see some of his direct-to-video movies now that you don't exactly see in Nicolas Cage when he's doing direct-to-video stuff. And I think maybe because, again, Nicolas Cage did it because he needed the money. He'd gotten broke, whereas John Cusack, I think, yes, he also needed the money. I'm sure it's probably why he's also doing it. But I think there's also a frustration of like, why am I not still getting the big roles that I had? And it didn't last as long for him as it did for Nicolas Cage either. It was probably like a good 5 years more that Cage had than Cusack had. So, but again, seeing the two of them pair here, this was John Cusack. This was our guy. He was sort of transitioning the way that Nicolas Cage transitioned the year before in The Rock. He was supposed to be doing that same transition, and it does eventually get there for him, but not to the same degree. He never becomes. He's definitely a big star. He's definitely a big Hollywood leading man, but maybe not to the degree that Nicolas Cage is. And again, Nicolas Cage doesn't quite. I would say maybe he does kind of get there to where Tom Cruise was. He definitely becomes that big of a leading man. I think he's one of the top ones in Hollywood. And again, Cusack is there, but he's just not quite. He never quite gets to that level. But he's fun enough here, I guess. This movie itself overall is fun enough. It's not the classic. It's not the all-around amazing thing that The Rock is. You can kind of see its warts more when you watch something like The Rock so soon before it. When you do them back to back like this, it's a real interesting thing. It's going to be interesting when I do Face Off and Snake Eyes to kind of see how those compare to Con Air as well, because Con Air is even though I had fun with it, it still represents all those things about 90s action that I didn't like. Big budget action, I should say. It represents Jerry Bruckheimer being on the tin more than anything. But, again, there's a lot of things to love about it. And I think Malkovich is one of those. Even if Malkovich doesn't like this movie after the fact, what's the old Michael Caine? Was it Christopher Lee that said it to Michael Caine, or Christopher Lee said it to somebody else, that like the key to being in bad movies is to be good in them? And Malkovich definitely does that here, right? Again, as much as I'm dumping on this movie, it's a fun bad movie. It's a mindless kind of fun bad movie. And again, the fact that Nicolas Cage comes into this movie and says, yeah, I'm not just going to play this part. I'm going to study this role, make it into something a little bit more, I think makes it more fun too, right? That he's this Alabama Army Ranger, that he just added all those pieces to the part that weren't there originally, rounds it out a little bit more, makes this thing to something a little bit more as well. Again, going back to the previous segment where we talked about how The Rock would be made today, this is definitely something that you bring this script to, an Emmett Furlow Oasis. This is the kind of thing that Randall Emmett would create on his own. There would be no landing anywhere, right? The only landing you might do is maybe at a hangar. But the idea of setting a movie completely on a plane with maybe some sequences in a hangar or a prison, for him would be ideal. The set location money that you could save on this, there's probably plane sets that they could use that are already created that they could just, grab and use for this kind of movie. So he would be all over something like this. You could see potentially like a Netflix, like higher budgeted version of this that maybe like the Millennium Films guys do. Maybe Boaz Davidson, Danny Lerner, or Avi Lerner. They might do something like this, which again, they'd have a plane set in Bulgaria that they would make this. I mean, you think of something like Altitude with Dolph Lundgren, kind of around that line. I mean, that one actually kind of works. It's a fun movie, but it also is, it's a short plane slog. And, what are you going to do with the plane to make it interesting? And it's not always easy to do. Again, this movie, I think, shows that the idea of setting a movie on a plane only gets you so far. And so there's a whole budget involved in making a movie like this even work on the level that this works. Because again, I don't think it works as well as The Rock. I think it's just sort of fun. It's fun enough. But yeah, the budget for this was, I guess, it was the same as The Rock. It was also $75 million. Doesn't make as much money as The Rock, but again, it didn't need to, right? I think it makes $225 million. At that time, you didn't need to make that much more money. Yes, you want to make as much as you can at the box office. You want to pull in as much as you can, but you could make money on the secondary market. In the 90s, that was really starting to establish itself, that you could sell a lot of copies both in the video store for people to buy their own VHSs, but also the rental places. A Con Air would probably have, at a Blockbuster at that time, a Con Air would probably have 10 copies. And if you've got 1,000 Blockbuster stores, that's 200,000 something like that. 20,000 copies, right? They're just selling 20,000 copies to Blockbuster. But that's if I do 2,000 stores. They're probably selling even more than that to Blockbuster. And then you're doing the same thing for Hollywood Video. You're doing it to the mom and pops. Mom and pops wouldn't buy 10 copies. They'd probably buy 2 or 3. Which I think is a big reason why the studios were happy when Blockbuster killed the mom and pops, because the mom and pops never worked on that scale. With a mom and pop, it was like you would have to reserve a copy of Con Air, and you'd call in, maybe try to reserve it, and they'd say actually somebody already reserved it, so you're out of luck, and you'd have to wait. So that's but that again, they're still selling those copies. And again, you'd go to maybe a Suncoast or something like that to buy your own VHS of something like this. And people did, people were fans enough of this kind of thing. I mean, I remember in the early 2000s, I remember a young woman I worked with. She had a roommate at the place that she was like renting a house. And so her and I think it was like 2 other people that lived with her. I can't remember, 1 or 2 other people. But the guy that lived there, he had essentially every TNT New Classic DVD. Like it was like kind of like the most soulless DVD collection you could imagine. It's almost like he just went to Columbia House and just, checked off all the boxes. He had like about 200 movies, and they were all this kind of movie, either these big budget action movies or romantic comedies or dramas. It was all everything. And I remember seeing that he had a big Michigan University flag, banner on his wall. And I was like, oh, did you go to University of Michigan? I knew he didn't go to the University of Michigan. I was sort of just taking the piss out of him. And he was like, oh, I just like the teams, So, But anyway, this is the kind of movie, right, that you'd have in that collection there. So it would sell enough copies, right, that you make as much as you can make on the gate worldwide, but then of course someone like a Nicolas Cage is going to bring in a lot more in the secondary market as well. So that overall this thing is going to pull in, it probably pulls in close to $1 billion total between the two, maybe 50 million, something like that. But it's going to sell a lot. And then of course the TV rights, for TNT New Classics, that's going to be big as well. So it's going to pull in money in a lot of different places. And, nowadays that kind of movie doesn't do that kind of thing, right? A movie like this is not going to be on linear TV probably. It's going to get, if it's going to get made, it's not going to get a theatrical release, or if it does, it's going to be a very limited theatrical release, something that pulls in maybe 10, 20,000 worldwide. So now it's got to do all its damage on streaming. I mean, yes, a Hulu would want something like this and would show it the way it's, showing this movie. But is it really going to make that much money? So, I mean, you're probably not going to get a $75 million budget for something like this. You'd get something, a fraction of that, 5 to 10 million in modern dollars as well. But again, from a Netflix standpoint, maybe like the Millennium guys could do this for 20 million in Bulgaria, get a few names to make it work. And again, you're not doing the kind of sequences that we get here. You're not doing the pitched battle at the abandoned airstrip, where you get that really great moment where you've got John Malkovich has kind of set up this trap to hem in the police officers that are coming to the airstrip to catch them, and then you've got John Cusack hopping in this big front end loader kind of thing, and sort of like leading everybody out because it's almost like this armored vehicle in a way. That kind of thing. You don't do that now in a modern movie. If you're doing that kind of thing, it's only in like a big budget blockbuster kind of thing. The Fast and the Furious movie would do something like that, but you're not a movie that's gonna not probably earn as a top 10 earner, and I don't think this was a top 10 earner for its year. I can hear the police coming to get me here, but yeah, I think it's something that I do. Again, this movie not as much as The Rock, but I still, watching this, think like there was a time when you can make movies like this, and there are ways to earn money for movies like this that, a Bruckheimer would plop down $75 million in 1996 money and get a bunch of names, get a bunch of big action sequences, blow up the Sands Hotel, blow up some stuff in an abandoned airstrip, do a car chase, do all that kind of stuff that they're doing in this movie, and know that, okay, yes, we want to make as much as we can theatrically, but if we only make $225 million theatrically, we've got all these other revenue streams that are available to us, that TNT is going to pay good money to air this as a TNT New Classic, that the VHS market's going to be big for this, the burgeoning DVD market that starts 3 years later, now suddenly everybody's buying this on DVD, getting their own DVD copy of it. That there are revenue streams that would make this a good investment for someone like a Bruckheimer. Yes, he would want this to make probably another $250 million in the theater that it doesn't make. Fine, it doesn't make it, but at least he can make the money back that he would want to make another movie like this. Nowadays, we just don't get this kind of movie, and it to that sense, I do feel bad. Yes, the transphobia is not great. The other aspects of the plot that don't work aren't great. But it's nice to just have a big budget actioner that again, I was too good for in the 90s, but that I can go back and watch now and go, yeah, they just don't make movies like this anymore. There just isn't a market to make movies like this anymore, unfortunately. Yeah, so, as I'm kind of wrapping up this session or this part of this, because I've kind of gone a little bit long, I think as I'm getting into the Face Off and the Snake Eyes, the one thing that I have been enjoying about this is the nostalgia piece of it. And I guess the one thing that is nice about streaming is that these movies are available for younger audiences to watch and see. And yes, if you account for the transphobia and some of the other elements of it, you can see movies with practical effects that were big and over the top at this time that just movies don't make them anymore. When you're going to put the budget into a movie like this, you're going to put it into, a studio like Disney, for example. They're putting this money into the Marvel movies, and they're going to make 2 or 3 Marvel movies in a year, and that's it. They're not going to make a Jerry Bruckheimer actioner anymore, and it is kind of too bad. It's a shame that the best we get for a movie like this is a Netflix movie that's made at a fraction of the cost in Bulgaria with sets. It's at that sense, I guess, that overall it's nice to kind of know that we had movies like this in the 90s, and we don't have them anymore. But we'll see, and again, this starts off this movie being successful enough furthers that movement of Nicolas Cage into that realm of the big leading man, and we're going to see it further in here. We're not going to watch Iris for this. We're going to watch just Snake Eyes and Face Off, but Iris is another one out of these next 3 for him that really firmly established Nicolas Cage as the big guy. But it's interesting because it doesn't take long until we get to the mid 2000s and we get like National Treasure and Next and movies like that aren't that great. The Ghost Rider movie that people weren't big fans of. So the ride kind of goes quick for him. But we're still on the ride right now, and he's going to take this money and buy dinosaur bones and an island and Action Comics #1. And it kind of thinks that the stream of the fount is always going to be open, and he's always going to be able to get money from these. And unfortunately, it doesn't work out that way for him. But at least we get these movies now. So as we wrap up here, again, my newest novel, Nadia and Aiden, is available on Kindle Unlimited, and paperback. The link is in the podcast description. Any of my novels, I'm happy if anybody who picks up any of my novels. So, for example, Chad and Accounting is my first book. That one is available also Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. If you've already bought Chad Accounting, you're looking for the next one. A Girl and a Gun is my second book. That's another one that people have picked up. Same thing, Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. So, but any of my books, if you want to pick them up, I always appreciate that. But yeah, thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back soon. So with DTVC Extra, I think it will be these 2 Cage movies, but it possibly might slide in an episode on Brave New World as well. We'll see what happens there. But thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back soon. Bye everyone.
staring